Well, it's episode 47 of Soul Care with Stevie Boy. It's a lot of episodes, but we're toward the end of Philippians chapter 4. Last time we looked at Paul's words in verse 14, yet it was good of you to share in my troubles. And then he goes on in verse 15. Moreover, which is very similar to therefore, except he's now saying, okay, and in addition to what I've already said, as you Philippians know, in the early days of your acquaintance with the gospel, when I set out from Macedonia, not one church shared with me in the matter of giving and receiving except you only. For when I was in Thessalonica, you sent me aid more than once when I was in need. Not that I desire your gifts. What I desire is that more be credited to your account. That to me is one of the greatest compliments that the Philippian church could receive from the apostle. From the very beginning, he said, in the earliest days of the gospel, when he set out from Macedonia, no other church, no other body of believers, or no other congregation supported him except the Philippians. I think if I were a Philippian and I heard this letter being read in our gathering, this would have given me a sense of healthy and maybe rightful pride. Not pride in what a great person I am, but gratitude that I had been part of what had begun as a bit of a movement of churches, and as well as, I'm sure, individuals, but primarily churches who supported Paul and his work spreading the gospel. And then in verse 17, where he says, not that I desire your gifts, it's as though he were saying, I'm not just trying to harvest money from you. There's a term that I heard, it's been years ago now, that I suppose because the context in which I heard it made me believe it was a term that was used pretty widely. It's called lift and offering. And what it consisted of was in a gathering, this happened to be at a week of high school camp, and a person got up on the stage and began to emotionally implore the students to give generously. And they took the offering. And when it came back, they counted and said, we can do better. And they took another offering. And my memory is they did this at least 3 times. It's called lifting an offering. Well, I think Paul would have said, I'm not trying to lift an offering. This is not about me trying to get your money. He said instead, what I desire is that more be credited to your account. You remember the words of Jesus where he said, don't store up treasures on earth where moth and rust corrupt and thieves break through and steal, but store up for yourselves treasure in heaven. That's what Paul's referring to. I'm pretty easily convinced. As though, it's interesting because God is not a scorekeeper, and yet he does keep an account. He is supremely aware of what we do, and yet he doesn't hold against us. This is a real paradox, and I'm not sure how to reconcile it, but I take from this that Paul is saying, I want you to store up treasure in heaven, and you can do that. You have done that as you have provided for my needs, as I have spread the gospel. I shared with you before that as part of the ministry that Debbie and I do with Open Door Libraries, we raise support for our activity. And honestly, it's not an inexpensive thing because we travel 2 or 3 times a year to Europe and the Middle East to give care to our folks on the field. I suppose on one level, you could say if you just want to look at the dollars and cents of it, it would be less expensive to wait until these individuals cracked up, bring them home, do the best you can to patch them up, and either send them back or replace them. On a dollar for dollar level, that might be less expensive. The problem is it's a very poor stewardship of the trust that we have in this ministry. Well, anyway, I mean, I can justify what we do in 2 or 3 different substantial ways, I think. I still struggle often. Can I just say it? I always struggle to ask people for their money to support our work. I'm coming to believe that that's based on a false belief. The false belief is that I am asking for people to give me money. If it was just that, I'd be way better off to do some kind of a GoFundMe or something on the internet. Send me money. I just want to see how much money I can get. But if I'm asking people to contribute into God's work, to help make it possible to advance the gospel, to make the love of Christ known in places where it is not well known, and in fact in places where there is quite heavy resistance to the gospel and Christ and his design, then it's not just about me. I want to only be a vehicle. People call me a tool, and that's what I am in this whole thing. Like Paul, I want to give people an opportunity to make a deposit in where their account in heaven, where their treasure can be there. I want that people could have their generosity credited to their account. In verse 18, I have received full payment and have more than enough. That's a substantial statement. I realize that one of the things Paul's referring to here is that the Philippians it's not like the Philippians owe him anything. And I think that's what he's saying. You don't owe me anything. Your account is paid in full. And in fact, I have more than I need. At that moment, remember, Paul is in Rome under house arrest. He's having to take care of his own expenses. You see, when you were imprisoned in this Roman culture in which Paul found himself, the prison didn't take care of your provision. You had to somehow arrange that others would take care of your provision, because what was provided in the prison was so meager and so nasty that it was unhealthy, and you wouldn't want that. And Paul says, I have more than enough. I think most of us, even when we're not sure how the ends are going to meet at the end of the month, right? We most often, I'm going to speak for myself, I have more than enough. I have a house that it's not mine, but I'm living in it, and God's providing, and we're meeting our obligations, and we have more than enough. There's no want. America is a country where there are people who do not have sufficient means. Their needs are not supplied. But most of us have more than we need. I am amply supplied now that I have received from Epaphroditus the gifts you sent. There he is, Epaphroditus. I like the character Epaphroditus. You're not going to meet very many people in our world and culture who that's their name. But Epaphroditus, I think he should be a little bit of a hero. You remember that earlier in the book, Paul talks about how Epaphroditus had nearly died in his work of providing service to Paul on behalf of the Philippians. Paul considered him his brother, his son in the faith. He considered him a terrific asset. and said, if he had died, I would have had sorrow upon sorrow. Now he says, it was Epaphroditus who brought the gift from the Philippians. And this gift, these offerings, Paul writes, they are a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God. What makes any offering a fragrant offering, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to God? Is it the amount? What is it? Is it the need compared with the amount? Is it what's the margin involved? Really, however you want to measure whatever it is that makes an offering a fragrant offering, a sacrifice, a pleasing sacrifice, it's a matter of the heart. It's a matter of motive. It has everything to do not with how I might measure your sacrifice or you might measure my offering, but what is really in the motivation in my heart. What's the motivation in your heart? C.S. Lewis, who I have told you before is one of my extraordinary heroes, he was asked about giving. And by the way, people who know a little bit about C.S. Lewis, they know the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and those things, and they've heard his name. They have no idea that he was a prolific author, and in his day, he could have been a wealthy author as well, but he gave his royalties away. And here's what he said about giving. If your giving doesn't pinch you, you're not giving enough. Wow. What he meant by that, I think, is if my giving doesn't keep me from doing something else with that same money that matters to me, I may not be giving enough. I may need to raise the stakes to up the ante. Wow. Now, there are a lot of people in churches. I would even say the majority of people that I've encountered in churches, they do not like the preacher talking about giving. You're always wanting to get in my pocketbook. Every time I come up here, you're talking about money. Well, first of all, it's not every time you come up here, unless you come once or twice a year. And if you do, you might happen to hit it on the times when money is being talked about. Otherwise, no, we don't talk. We probably take an offering every time we're together, but we don't lift an offering. And we certainly don't try to guilt you into giving more. And if your pastor, if your preacher is trying to guilt you into it more, you need to ask yourself why you're involved in that particular fellowship. Because it's not about guilt anymore. It's about grace. And when I reflect on the grace of God, it's impossible for me to not have this generous gratitude. No, I suppose it's not impossible, but what I have to do is I have to push the grace of God away and let my selfishness and what I want step up into first place. This is hard cheese for a lot of people, and I've got more to say about it, but I'm not going to do that until next time. I don't have any big homework for you and no big challenge, just the idea that the grace of God makes it possible for us to make an offering that's a fragrant offering to God, an acceptable sacrifice, pleasing to Him because of our motive. I'll talk to you, and I hope you join me next time for Soul Care with Stevie Boy.